From the latest on Caribbean cruises to kosher safaris, pilgrimages to Jewish Eastern Europe, and award-winning wines and international cuisine in sun-drenched Tel Aviv. Sit back and enjoy the trip with the travel edition of the Jerusalem Post podcast. Good. Where are we? Well, it's afternoon, isn't it? We're just about afternoon.
Say hello. Where's your manners?
Oh, hello.
How are you?
Very well. My manor is in Modi'in in Israel.
That's very Cockney English of you.
Why? What's manor short for?
What manor do you come from? Is like, what area do you come from?
Oh, really?
But your London soul is pouring out finally.
I was thinking of a manor as a nice, fancy abode in which one resides.
You're northern. It doesn't happen like that.
I know. Enough of our domestic British
idle chit-chat.
Chit-chat.
What a lovely view.
Absolutely stunning. Behind us is the Israeli coastline. When I say behind us, it's way off in the distance, but just the other side of the buildings we're next to, you can actually see all the way to the Israeli coast, and we're facing in the direction of Jerusalem.
Can I point out, when we were on our way up the hill, you couldn't even see the sign to turn right, so your chances of seeing the coast to me are minimal.
Ladies and gentlemen, the new podcast name is Abuse David.
I like that. We should do more of that.
We are looking at a beautiful valley. It is covered in conifers, a lot of very natural Israeli plants. We're coming out of what's been a very wet winter as opposed to the previous year. In England, we used to talk about April showers, and it's that sort of day, even though we're recording this early in March. Bit of rain. The clouds are magnificent.
They are. They're very fluffy.
If ever you come to this part of the world, something to try to do, if you can, is to drive from Jerusalem towards Tel Aviv or from the mountains towards the coast at sunset. The sunsets here in winter are otherworldly, just stunning.
Very, very colourful. I love the cruising podcast. That's one of my favourite podcasts. But if you could top cruising, what would it be, David? For me.
Oh, drinking alcohol.
Thank you very much.
I didn't know where you were going with that.
What should we do today, baby?
So we don't live that far away, but in order to get to where we are now, we had to go right past it on a train, get onto a bus, come back the other way, walk up a hill, and all of this so that we could drink alcohol and not drive.
If you're staying at a nice hotel in Jerusalem, it would be much simpler, and possibly even Tel Aviv. But from Modi'in, where we live, it was a bit of a trek. But we are in Yad HaShlosha?
Yad HaShmona.
Oh, see, I was 5 short.
Learning to count with Mark.
We are in Yad HaShmona in the Jerusalem hills next to Nevo Winery.
If any of you have watched the main news channel, Channel 12 News, it comes from a building about 200 yards away from where we're standing now.
And to make this podcast even better, later in this podcast, we're going to be somewhere else altogether in the Judean hills at another winery.
We don't know which yet because we're still in the middle of going eeny, meeny, miny, mo. We're still deciding. But yeah, we're at a winery. We're going to go into a quick jingly ad break, and then we'll tell you about where we are to the other side of the break.
To talk the latest news in Israel, the Jewish world, and everything in between.
This is the J-Post Podcast. I'm Tamar Uriel-Beery, Managing Editor of jpost.com.
And I'm Tzvika Klein, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post.
And I'm Sarah Ben-Nun, Night Editor at the Jerusalem Post. Join us as we bring some of the most impactful voices to bring you into what it means to be Jewish, to be Israeli today.
Every week, we bring you with us into the newsroom in every sense.
Stop being so dramatic. This is just our coffee break.
You can find us every Thursday on jpost.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We'll see you there.
Yalla, bye.
So, Mark, in all of our introduction outside, we didn't say where we were.
Can we?
No.
I don't know. I've been sat down with wine for 5 minutes, so I forgot everything.
So we're in the Jerusalem hills in a place called Yad HaShmona, next to Nevo Winery. It's right by the main highway that connects Jerusalem to the rest of the country.
We're at the Domaine Du Castel winery. We are in the visitors centre. We are sat by a roaring log fire, which
it's beautiful. It's gorgeous.
Which in Israel is a rare thing. And we are with the founder and winemaker Eli Ben Zaken.
Ellie, thank you first of all for your hospitality, for meeting us, and we're going to have a tour with you. We're going to taste some of the wines, but first we want to know a little bit about you, your background, and then we'll get on to discussing a little bit more about the winery. So where are you from, and so on?
First of all, thank you for choosing us for your podcast. I was born in Alexandria in Egypt. We left in 58, I was 14. We went to Italy. My parents thought of going to Australia before that, so they took me out of French-speaking school to an English school. I lost a year in the transition. Somehow I got a scholarship by one of the Jewish refugee organizations, and I was sent to boarding school in England, where I stayed for 6 years. I came back to Milan, 2 years at the Bocconi University, studying economics, which I didn't like. I didn't choose it because I thought I would like it. I chose it because I thought my father would like me too. Went to Geneva to the interpreter school. I read French, English and Italian. Got married to Monique Jerusalmi, also from Egypt. I had to postpone the wedding because the Six-Day War came along and we were supposed to get married in July. I came to Israel as a volunteer, postponed my exams, and after staying for 3 months in Israel, I decided this is where I see myself living in. I became a real Zionist. Before the war, the 3 weeks of waiting, Arab students at the University in Geneva would say, this time we'll throw you all into the sea. Obviously, it was a big relief and a big victory afterwards. So in 1970, we came to Israel. Ilana was already born. She was 10 months old. Monique was pregnant of Eitan, who was born in Hadassah. We were renting a flat in Jerusalem. I decided I wanted to live in a house in the country. Eventually, I found a house in Ramat Raziel, where I'm still there.
You married a lady called Yerushalmi and you came to Israel, and we're sat here, more than 50 years later, and you're a winemaker in the hills of Jerusalem. How did that journey happen from coming to Israel to being a winemaker?
We are going to get an answer to Mark's story in a minute, because we're already at the tasting session. Normally we do this at the end of the pods, but we've done everything in reverse. So you're going to get the tour afterwards, and we're actually doing the tasting at the moment. We're on to our third sample of one of the wines here. So far we have been on whites and rosés, and this is a Raziel.
You had a Castel Rosé. Castel Rosé is Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Malbec, and it's made in stainless steel tanks, and it's bottled early, 5-6 months after the harvest. Raziel is another wine made in Raziel, in our second winery. It is mainly Mourvèdre from southern France, the grape Mourvèdre, Grenache, and a little Syrah. It is fermented and aged on the lees in 600-liter barrels. It is aged for about 10 months. I think you can taste the difference.
Shall we?
I think we should.
I've got the big nose.
Going back to the Insult David podcast. I've already finished mine, David. So.
People talk about rose and peach and all these types of things, stone. I just smell gentle. Yes, just gentle. Do you have to find all of these base ideas?
No, we don't have to find anything. You just have to tell me you like it, and I'll be happy.
Just a broadcasting tip for you listening out there. We're doing this now, drinking, and we've recorded all of our tour, because for health and safety reasons, we're not allowed to go around the winery completely drunk.
This is excellent. This is really nice.
My question was about the 50-year journey to becoming a Jerusalem winemaker.
And we're not allowed to taste any more till you answer the question, because another 2 bottles just arrived.
But I have to swallow this cheese.
We'll talk amongst ourselves while Ellie's sampling his lunch.
If you come to Domaine Du Castel and you come to the visitor centre and you do a tasting, it's accompanied by some very lovely bread and cheese.
We've got also olive oil, and I'm guessing that that's a pesto. And we also have a cherry or berry, one or the other, jam preserve, a cherry preserve as well.
One of those things that I've said that often quoted by the PR here is that I didn't have a dream, but now I have one. And in the sense that when I started, I didn't have really a goal to make the best Israeli wine, but always to step by step, year by year, to make as good a wine as I could. I'm not all religious, but it's as if I was taken by God or an entity and taken on a path that led eventually to what we are today. I really didn't plan to grow so much. I even thought we shouldn't grow so much.
I should just say at this point, because it's not something that we've recorded, that all of this actually started kind of accidentally because you were involved in a local planning issue with the area in which you live, and you, in order to make your point, ended up just planting a variety of fruits in your property. And so it was completely coincidental that grapes was the thing that took root.
I planted fruit trees all over the land around my house, but there was one plot that was so thin in soil that I had to break the rock so that what I thought would be the only plant that would survive would be vines. I had a tractor to break the rock so that the roots might go through it, and it succeeded. That was in 88. The first harvest was in 92. We made 2 barrels at 600 bottles.
It's amazing. And from there, you're now at 400,000 bottles, which, as you're saying, is not huge. It's not like some of the big industries that are producing millions. But
it is huge for us. But I think I will not be corrected by saying that we are the largest of the small wineries. Others that are larger than us are over 1 million or 2. And then 15 million, 20 million, like Carmel. We are large, but we also have the capacity of taking care of each vineyard and take care that every tank has the attention that he must have. And the wines are there to prove that we must be doing something right.
we're going to head now into some of the areas of this winery. We might look at the bottling. Hopefully we'll get to the cellars. I noticed that we've been brought another couple of bottles of red this time. We'll get back to those a bit later on in the podcast.
This is Mark Gordon from the Jerusalem Post Podcast Travel Edition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at MarkDavidPod, or mail us at markdavidpod@gmail.com. So now we've come into the bottling room and the packing area. Beforehand we were in the tank room and we saw a large number of... How many tanks are there exactly?
36.
How big is the biggest tank?
13,000 liters.
How many people work here?
About 40, including the family and the agricultural team.
This is a family business, isn't it?
I have 2 sons and a daughter. They all work here.
Did they have to go away to study viticulture, agriculture, or do they learn here?
Not all of them are making wine. My son Ethan and I are making the wine. Ilana takes care of exports and acquisitions. Ariel is big manager.
So a good bottle of wine isn't just made overnight. It takes years, 2, 3, 4 years, from when the grapes first come to the winery till they're in a bottle.
It depends on which wine. We have wines like Sauvignon Blanc of La Vie White, or Blanc La Vie. It's bottled in February after the harvest. That means we harvest it in July, August. The Sauvignon Blanc, it's an early harvest. By February, it's in the market. But if you take the Grand Vin, it will be in the market only for the holiday period 2 years later.
When you first started, did you get it wrong? Did you learn?
No,
Did you keep...
I was lucky. I didn't get it wrong. Somehow, I don't know why, but I did it right from the first vintage. In the tasting room, that we have a fax there from Serena Sutcliffe. She's a master of wine. She used to be the head of the wine department of Sotheby's. And in 95, she got a bottle of the 92, and she wrote back to the journalist who brought her the bottle that it was probably the best Israeli wine. Most important thing she wrote is something must be right with the soil, the altitude and the weather and the clone. That's it. At that point, we decided to become professionals.
I want to pick up on that because you've got vines in 4 locations. I'm assuming each one of them is a slightly different altitude. Each one points in a slightly different direction. How do you navigate that?
I taste. The most important decision that a winemaker has to make is the date of the harvest. And then it's a lot of logistics. It's not that one morning you decide that's it and you're sure to be able to harvest the next day because you don't have the people to do it. So it takes prediction also, say, okay, there is a leeway and not all the varieties have the same leeway. That means Cabernet, you have more time from the day you say go. You don't have to do it next day. It can be even 10 days later. But Merlot, the time is much shorter. It's under a week.
Have you listened to the Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition? I'm David Harris, and together with my co-host Mark Gordon, we bring you the best from the world of travel and tourism.
We have people who literally fly to Park City just to do the ski minion.
And it has that heavenly taste that you don't really find nowadays in the market.
When was the last time you went to a restaurant and they bought you a picnic basket about 8 courses in?
The Dracula tour, that's a very unusual honeymoon option, really.
The Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition brings you the joys of travel and tourism. So why not subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts?
Cheers, Mark.
Cheers, David.
As we walked into the cellar, we descended the staircase, we came through into this cool environment with classical music playing in the background, with a video that tells the story of your family and how you began the company. And then you look out to this sea of, I guess it's a claret colour and a very light brown, the barrels. And it looks like a sea of barrels stretching into the distance. It's beautiful, it's calming. When you come into this room, I'm guessing you get a sense of accomplishment, of achievement.
Yes, it's a beautiful room. It's you have to realize that what you see is all handmade. That means the wine in the barrel itself is handmade. The setting up of the barrels in rows and one on top of the other, it's like a bricklayer worker with a ruler and the string. It's hard work. It's one of the hardest work in the winery, also to empty the barrels and also to fill them up.
There's something quite magical about this room that you walk in. David mentioned there's the video in the background and you can see the first batch being made, but you've also got the smell of the wine coming from the barrels.
You're lucky about the smell because the smell is because we moved wine around in the past few days, so you can smell the wine. Usually you can't.
As we've wandered around with you and we've had conversations, both recorded and non, there's a mixture of the traditional, so talking about the way that you lay out the barrels, but also the technological, so the sorting of grapes. How do you see the industry developing in these medium to large size wineries that we've got in the Jerusalem Hills and around the country? Do you see things becoming more and more technological and less input from human beings? Or do you think that you have to have that human touch to make things quality?
I really think the human touch is definitely the most important factor. Yesterday we had a meeting of the IPVO. IPVO is the Israeli Winemakers Association. We had lectures, a lot of chemistry in the lectures. I stood up and I said, I'm not a chemist. It's nice to understand what is happening or could happen, but you will not, winemaking, analyze all the time what's happening in your wine. That means you have to taste and you know what intervention needs to be done. Simple things like cleanliness, sanitation, is so important.
When you made your first batch of wine, was it kosher?
No.
And
no.
What was the decision behind
becoming kosher? We were not doing well in exports, but we were doing very well in the country. A French wine merchant, Jewish, Roberto Cohen, said to me, you're making the best Israeli wine. I want you to make me some kosher wine. And he sent a team of people to make the wine. The organizer of the team was French Rabbi Mordechai Seba, really an expert on kashrut, not somebody who is there to make an easy buck. And then one day I said to him, you know, Mordechai, if I become kosher, I will do it with you, because he was explaining everything. A lot of logic and not inventing things which were not written or exaggerating.
Welcome back to the visitor centre. I'm being poured some more wine. We've sampled 6 or 7 so far. So you've been counting. Yeah. Mark, a former accountant, tells me that it's 7. We started with the white, we're going through the rosés and the reds, but you said we're going to finish with a white Chardonnay. Why finish on the lighter, the crisper wine?
It is not lighter, it's as complex, but it's much fresher, more acidic, and it cleans your palate at the end of the tasting.
Those of us who were not necessarily born to fine things, we would finish our meal at home with jello or jelly or custard or something like that, whereas in finer circles we finish with cheese and crackers or cheese and fruit.
Ideally with a white wine and not with a red one. This is a traditional way of tasting wine in Burgundy, that the last wine is the white wine.
Do you have a favourite wine? Your own, somebody else's, a style, a type, a country?
Don't ask me that question.
Why not?
It's like you ask who is your favourite child, you know. Even for a very critical father, I appreciate the things they have, the positive aspects. We tasted the La Vie Red 22, I think it's one of the best La Vie Reds ever made. So rewarding and complex for a wine which is relatively cheap. When you get to Grand Vin, obviously you expect more, and I think also we get much more. I don't have a really favorite wine. Sometimes I taste wines like a Mouton Rothschild 2005, and I was so jealous.
I can tell you I have a favourite child. I only have one, so it's quite an easy decision.
Before we close, talk a little bit about your passion. As we've already heard, this is something that came to you completely by accident. Your first passion was for Israel, for Zionism. It's through your life, and as Mark pointed out, you married somebody who's named after the capital, Jerusalem. But wine was not something that was innate, that was inherent within you. How has it manifested itself in your soul?
For those who don't know, I owned a restaurant for 22 years in Jerusalem, Mamma Mia. The money from Mamma Mia helped to build the winery. What I brought with me as a character or personality is perfection. I cannot do anything in halfway. If it is a recipe, I will do it exactly up until the end. And very much like this, I followed recipes in winemaking to the sickening end where everybody around me said, it's enough, give up, you don't have to. But this is my character: cleanliness, sanitation, aesthetics. I believe that the wine knows how it is treated. Wine is a living thing.
How can visitors come and take part in your passion, to taste your wines, to come and sit in this centre? How do they get hold of the details, and what can they do at the visitor centre?
Call the winery and book.
There's a very easy way to do it these days, which of course is the internet. The website is Castel, castel.co.il. Can people who are from overseas also order through the...
Definitely. They have to get to the winery because I cannot pay on the website.
Eli Ben Zaken, thank you for being a gracious host as well as a wonderful winemaker. I'm very, very happy.
Yeah, you're very happy. His nose is going that pink colour. He's got the glow around his eyes. Eli, thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me, really.
Israel Wine Fact File.
More than 95% of the world's vineyards are planted between 30 degrees and 50 degrees latitude north and south. Israel sits right in the sweet spot, or should that be semi-dry? Israel produces over 40 million bottles of wine per year and in excess of 10 million bottles of grape juice. More than 80% of those are consumed locally, with the rest exported. Israel is the 32nd largest wine exporter in the world. Over 40% of exported wines are sold in the US, with France, Canada and the UK the next three largest export markets. Japan is one of the fastest growing markets for Israeli wine. Red wines account for 2/3 of bottles produced each year. The most popular vintages in Israel are Cabernet Sauvignon, Carignan and Merlot. The biggest wineries in Israel are Barkan, Carmel, Tepperberg and Golan Heights Winery, each producing more than 5 million bottles per year. The first recorded winery in Israel was opened by the Ginio family. The oldest winemaking family still making wine is the Shaw family. They founded their winery in the old city of Jerusalem in 1848 and now run the Arza and Zion wineries.
You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast, Travel Edition, and this is part 2 of our winery trip.
Should we do like 6 parts for this? I enjoyed the first part so much.
This is going to be very contrasty to where we were before. Let's try to do this in parallel. So the first thing we did when we were nearer to Jerusalem by the highway was to describe exactly where we were. So it really is on the beaten track. So it's quite easy to get a bus there from Jerusalem and so on. And you are next to 2 or 3 little villages. Here we're in the middle of bloody nowhere.
I know, and there weren't many buses to come here, but thanks to my delightful wife, who has volunteered to drive us to and from, I'm able to fully partake in drinking.
So before we scare you off and say, oh, it's impossible to get to, first of all, obviously, if you've rented a car from anywhere in Israel, it's such a small country, it's easy to get here. But I would also say that there are buses along the corridor between Jerusalem and Bet Shemesh. So don't say, no, this is a difficult place. And in fact, if you are walkers, there is tremendous hiking around this part of the country where we are now, and what better than to go for a hike and finish it off with a little bit of a wine taste.
Or you could get a taxi to and from. And remember, don't drink and drive.
Fair point. Yes, I did mention a car. That's a very good point.
But you'll spill too much. That's why you shouldn't drink and drive.
So where are we, Mark?
We are in Moshav Matah, at the bottom of the Judean hills, sort of the... Do you call it foothills?
Yeah, it's the bottom end of the foothills. We're very close to the start of the Ella Valley. Those of you who are biblically aware or biblical scholars will know that the Ella Valley is where David and Goliath fought, amongst other things. There are also mentions, if I'm not mistaken, in the Bible of vineyards in that part of the world, and indeed today you can take either guided or self-guided a wine tour through the Ella Valley area.
Yes, in organising this trip, there are a plethora of wineries in this area in the Judean hills. We had a wide range to choose from, but we chose to come here to the Nevo Winery on Moshav Matah, a small family-run winery, whereas beforehand we went to Domaine Du Castel, which produces 400,000 bottles a year. Here, this is a much smaller operation.
Should we go in, meet the folks and find out more about it?
Is that before or after we taste the wine?
Israel is the startup nation, a scale-up nation, the unicorn country. Join me, Maayan Hoffman, Deputy CEO of Strategy and Innovation, for an analysis of the most critical Israeli tech innovations today. We'll highlight new tech trends, discuss the latest innovations, and interview at least one of Israel's most promising companies. So if you'd like to know what's on the cutting edge, then this Jerusalem Post show is for you. You can listen to Inside Israeli Innovation on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
My name is Lior, and I run Nevo Winery for the past 4 years.
We're going to start not in the tasting centre, but we've actually come down to the Merlot vineyard. And if you can listen carefully, you can hear a lovely bottle being opened. What are we opening here?
We are opening a wine named Summer. Summer is a blend of 60% Petit Verdot, 30% Cab, and 10% Merlot. This wine ages for 14 months in a 2-year-old barrel. Now, because the barrel is older, it gives less of the oaky flavors, of the secondary flavors, and the wine is more fruit-forward, lighter kind of wine, and it's perfect for a summer day, since this is how our March looks like. A wine that is good for summer days pretty much is good all year round in Israel.
Even though it's March, it is a balmy 22, 23 degrees out there. That's around 70 Fahrenheit. And as well as coming to the vineyards, we've also come to meet the local insects who are following us everywhere. And in the distance, I can see horses. There are 3 horses working the field. Are they employees of the vineyard?
Yes, they definitely are. They're part of the team.
And what's their job?
Basically to eat, to provide manure.
Mark has been given a very generous, how do you say, a generous dollop, a generous drop, a generous
pour.
A generous pour it is. It's very interesting and different to be trying the wine actually where it's grown.
There is something beautiful about being out in the hills, in these vineyards, watching the horses and getting the bouquet of the wine.
We should say it's very early in the morning for this type of activity. I haven't had breakfast. I haven't drunk any water yet. What about you?
Oh, I came prepared. I had breakfast. It's 11 o'clock, which is opening hours for pubs in the United Kingdom, so why not?
Just figure that I don't want to get caught short, so if I know I'm going out into the fields, I don't.
Caught short? Old man's problems.
Right, let's have a sniff.
It's very difficult to get my nose in with the microphone also in there, but...
As you've commented on previous podcasts, because of the size of my nose, I don't have the problem. Are you getting any hints of anything? Remember, previous winery that we've been to, they say it doesn't matter if you can't smell stones and peaches and strawberries and stuff. You just take it as it is.
I'm getting a good smell of the barrel and a very, very full-bodied wine here, I think.
Is that true? Is that accurate?
First of all, it's definitely accurate because it's his nose and you can't argue with it. And everyone smells and tastes different flavors. I feel less of the secondary flavors, more of the initial flavors of the fruit. I get more red fruit kind of flavors, more cherries a bit and raspberries, more towards that direction. I don't feel as much barrel actually in this wine, but maybe I'm comparing to our other wines. Basically, all the flavors in wine or the smells come from 3 different origins. Can come either from the vineyard itself, so it's the fruity flavors, the fruit, the smells of flowers, spices, stuff like that. The secondary flavors are from the barrel, so it will be your chocolate, your vanilla, your leather, your oak. And the tertiary flavors will be from aging the wine in the bottle. It will be your almonds, your candies, your forest floor, your mushrooms, whatever.
Take the last of those, which is the bottle. The bottle is a new bottle. It's not been a bottle of mushrooms, for example.
Of course. Yes, and we don't add cherries to our wines. But wine gets different flavors from the surroundings, even when it's sealed in the bottle, because there's still molecules of air going in the wine, maturing it, aerating it, and it develops another set of flavors and of smells. It's not because we used the bottle for mushrooms, and it's not because we added spices to the wine.
An idiot's question here, because I can be an idiot when it comes to wine. Are there cherries and raspberries grown near here to get that smell? How do you get from grape to a smell of cherries and raspberries?
First of all, there's no cherries here, and there's no raspberries here. It's a good question, and I'm not sure that I have the final and, the one answer. It does have things to do with you as a person, because the part in your brain that is responsible for smells is right adjacent to the one responsible for memories. So memories generate flavors and smells very strongly, and then if you have the connection in your mind, then it will affect the taste of the wine. Also, there's a thing about molecule structure, and a vine is an amazing plant, and it does take flavors from the surroundings. In this case, there are no cherries here, but something in the area inspires the vine to give exactly those flavors. This is the whole idea behind terroir. If you grow the same grapes in different areas, you will get different tastes.
How is your olfactory system? Like, do you have strong recollections of scents, tastes, and so on? If you walk into a room where there's a scent, do you suddenly think, that reminds me of home or something?
I think with age it dulls a little. I like spicy food and I like strong smells. So to some extent I still get those smells when I walk into a room, But I don't think I quite get the subtleties. What about you?
Well, you know I don't. I stick my nose in and it all just smells like wine.
I think when I used to be a secret smoker and I went home and pretended I didn't smoke, people could smell it as soon as I walked in the door. So people have a better system than me.
Have you tasted?
Shall we?
Cheers.
I got gooseberries there.
I just taste wine.
By the way, I wouldn't know the taste of gooseberries because I didn't grow up tasting a lot of gooseberries, so it's very hard for me to detect the gooseberries from the raspberries, from the blueberries, from the whatever, because I grew up in Israel. But what you said about your nose, so first of all, biologically, usually women have a better sense of smell than men. Second of all, it's like a muscle. You need to train. Basically, you need to drink more wine.
Oh dear.
I'm all for that.
You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at MarkDavidPod or mail us at markdavidpod@gmail.com. Now we're going to meet the founder, the creator, the CEO and the brains behind the Nevo Winery. Funnily enough, his name is Nevo Chazan. Thank you very much indeed for hosting us at your beautiful vineyard. Your first vineyard you started work on in 2002, but that's not just something that happens overnight. So how did it all begin?
אז אני עד לפני 21 שנים, לא היה לי שום קשר ליין.
Up until 2002, I had no connection to the wine world. I wasn't born a winemaker, and the only wine we used to drink at home was the Kiddush wine on Fridays. 2002, we were moving from our small little cabin to the house that we built. And as we're moving the stuff, we got news that my aunt, my dad's sister, is sick, and she needs treatments in Hadassah. She's originally from here, but she moved to the north about 30 years ago. And I called her and said, listen, come stay with us. You'll be closer to the hospital and we'll get through this together. She's a very special person, my aunt, and she came here with her own bread oven. 5 a.m, she would be on the trees picking olives, making olive oil, picking date, making jams and special breads, and we had an amazing time with this aunt. During this time, she also said, you know, that harvest season is coming. If you have a friend who grows grapes, let's pick some grapes, let's press them, and let's have wine at home. I called a childhood friend of mine who happens to be the local wine grower, and I told him that my aunt is here and she wants to make wine. And he said, sure, go to the vineyard, whatever you find is yours. It's important to say that back then they would harvest with a machine. Today we do everything manually, but back then they used a machine. And we came to the vineyard and we saw suddenly a whole row that was not harvested. So I called a friend and I told him that there's grapes that he forgot to harvest, and he said that the machine that he uses cannot work there because it's too narrow. So we found ourselves back at home with 800 kilos of grapes. We had 800 kilos of grapes. With not a lot of knowledge, we pulled out plastic bags from the house. We put plastic bags on the kids' shoes. We pressed the grapes and put the juice in big plastic tanks. After a while, smells started to come up from the cellar, and I'm not sure if now I can recreate it, but there was something amazing about this first wine with its strengths and the smells and the tastes.
שגם אם ננסה היום לעשות משהו כזה, לא יודע אם נצליח. אחרי שנה, ברוך השם, היא החלימה.
And after a year, thank God, she got better and everything was okay, and she went back home. And before she left, I told her that something about this time with her and this process sucked my soul into it, and I'm going to continue making wine. She started laughing a bit, because what's your connection with wine? Up until then, I was a semi-trailer driver. But I continued making wine, and with time I went to school and I studied winemaking. Most of my studying were done here in Israel. And during this time I also planted a few vineyards. In 2010 we also built the visitor center.
You've told us about the event that brought you into winemaking. You had another life-changing event in your life 30 years ago. Can you tell us about that?
In 1993, I was driving the semi-trailer then, and I was delivering gas to gas stations. One night, we went to a gas station not far from here near Bethlehem, and 6:30 in the morning, it's very, very cold. Me and my bodyguard were sitting at the office of the gas station. He's looking at me the whole time with a gun in his hand. And after a few minutes, it became very, very hot, and I asked him to escort me to the truck to change from the very heavy suit I was wearing. When I came back from changing, I sat down in the chair in the office, and I looked to the window that was on my left. Suddenly I heard a big explosion, and when I looked back, I saw that there's no bodyguard anymore. The next thing I see is a guy standing in front of me with his gun pulled towards my head. He's pulling the trigger and nothing happened. No bullet came out. He tried again and no bullet came out. For the third time I was able to stand up. I fought the guy a bit. I was able to run off. As I was running, the guy found the gun of my bodyguard and shot 5 bullets. You see me standing here and the guy missed. I reached to the end of the station and there was like a hole there, a pit, and I jumped in. At that point, the terrorists took a car and drove off. And I was able to climb out and I took the bodyguard to a hospital in Bethlehem. It was before the agreement, so that was still allowed. From there, he was with a helicopter. They moved him to Adasa Ein Karem, where they were able to save his life, and the guy today is alive.
What does that story bring to what you do now?
I'm telling this story not because I'm a big hero, but for years I didn't treat myself. And as I started making wine, I also started to looking for answers to that problem, me and my wife. And we found this doctor in the U.S. that treats soldiers coming back from Iraq. She had students here that treated similar problems, and I connected them, and I went through a very intense, long therapy, during which I had to relive this whole situation over and over again, including going back to the same place with bodyguards and with help this time. The guy now that stands in front of you is not the same one that was here before this treatment. And everything you experience here in the winery, in the visitor center, is all part of that change, that changed the way I think and I feel and I operate regarding the smallest things.
Have you listened to the Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition yet? Hi there, I'm David Harris, and together with co-host Mark Gordon, we bring you the very best of the world of travel.
We've had our safety instructions and we're in a basket.
Either the cars are shrinking or we're going higher.
Now sat on a high chair.
You're listening to the last will and testament of Mark Simon Gordon.
We're in the independent micronation of Ujupis.
If I wasn't married, I'd be chasing away your indigenous 78-year-old and taking you for myself.
The drink afterwards, just to calm my nerves, will be number one, but this is definitely up there.
The Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition brings you the joys of travel and tourism. So why not subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts?
That was really nice, being in a field, horses strolling in the background. And every time we spoke to Nevo, the horses obviously had an opinion and wanted to join in.
Here's a question for you, quiz question. What noise does a horse make?
Neigh.
They say the whole time. That's their noise.
Spell
P-R-P-R-P-R-P.
You're in the world of PR, so you should...
So we've now come into the lovely visitor centre. It's a small area, probably room for, about 40 people, I'm guessing?
Yeah, we're sharing it with a group of about 14 gentlemen who are here letting their hair down. I think they've been in the army. Mm-hmm. And in front of us is a lovely blend from 2020 based on Petit Verdot, some beautiful cheeses, some oil, some fresh baked bread.
Shall we give it a go?
I think so. It would be rude not to. That was my head, David.
It sounded like a bell.
Exactly. There's nothing in there except just one thing going from side to side.
Okay, now time for a sniff. That was a stereo sniff. We both did it at the same time.
It's really rich and fruity.
I just smell wine. I'm hopeless. Absolutely hopeless.
You know wine is made from fruit.
Yes.
Grape is a fruit.
Oh, so you were just covering yourself by saying fruit, sounding like you know.
One of the interesting things we learned when we were in the field is, and again, it was going back to how it picks up its taste.
Yes.
While we were in the Merlot fields, we found out that the fields themselves are surrounded by plants with za'atar and herbs and spices, and the bees make their way between the vines and these herb plants and back again, and it infuses the grapes with a spice that gives it an even stronger flavour.
Amongst the others, I know he mentioned there was thyme, Did I hear marjoram? I'm not sure. But it was really interesting.
What's the Hebrew for marjoram?
I actually do know that. We have some at home, and I had to look it up. But it's not marjoram. It does have an interesting... It's not marva. Is it marva?
I'm asking you. I have no clue. Quiz question.
Where's my phone? I'm going to look it up. While I'm looking it up, why don't we have a sip?
A comical slurp from David.
This one is going to stay on my tongue for a long time. Can you feel it entering the crevices of your tongue? We sound so pathetic, or at least I do, because we don't have the wine knowledge. And we know that there are many people who will talk about wine and use all these fancy words and whatever. But bottom line, it's as we've heard through this podcast, it's about whether you like the wine or not.
Exactly. Do you know what? I think to help improve from every podcast going forward, we should just go to another winery for each podcast.
Should we try the cheeses? So we've got a double, is it multicoloured or two-coloured?
Two-coloured, orange and
cheese.
Yellow cheese with a nice crust on it. Crust. Skin.
Peel.
Rind.
Rind. Cheese rind. Well done. We've lived outside of the UK for too long, and if you live in Israel, you kind of, at some point, you lose your Hebrew and you lose your English.
It's because you're trying to say the word in Hebrew and you're thinking, now what was that in English? I don't have that problem. I don't know the word in Hebrew or English. But
anyway, we're going to get back to drinking a little bit more wine, and I guess you'll hear from us in a few moments.
Maybe half an hour.
Mark.
David.
I am so relieved that there was a plate of cheese and bread and olive oil, because otherwise I would be under the table. And between you and me and off the record, we did do some pretty heavy drinking last night as well.
I think you were about to say, off the record, I love cheese. And by the way, you know when you say it on a microphone, it isn't off the record.
I love cheese. Anyway, we are on sample number 4. Have you tried it yet?
I've smelt the bouquet.
Okay, let me have a go. Another sniff. Oh, that was a snort, not a sniff.
Okay. Like a straw for.
I'm swirling.
I'm just going to swap hands because I've actually got my tasting hand and my microphone is the same hand.
While I'm swirling, can you explain where this glass came from? Or, well, not the glass, the wine.
The glass was manufactured in China. We're finishing off with 100% Merlot, and if you remember back 10-15 minutes,
which we don't,
we were in the vineyard with Nevo and we were watching the Merlot vineyard being prepared for the upcoming harvest, the horses wandering up and down, all the midges like flying around us.
Do people outside of the UK know what midges are?
I don't know, is there an American word for little things that buzz around?
Little biting buggers that are not mosquitoes.
Biting buggers. Oh, there's an alliteration.
All the Americans will be thinking it's something to do with their nose.
I'm with you now. I'm trying to work out where Americans put midges up their nose.
Anyway, as you can tell, we've been drinking.
We are coming to the end of making this wonderful podcast because David told me we can't have 7 wineries on this podcast.
Can we taste it? I smell blackcurrant.
Oh, I've drunk it. I didn't bother smelling it.
I think we say sniff or snort.
I thought you smell wine.
Try to drink it, to be honest, or inject it. We're going to be listened to very, very carefully by our friends at 2 wineries who are featured in this podcast. And they're going to be listening to this last bit and thinking to themselves, my God, the Philistines. So I'm going to remind...
They're busy drafting a letter saying, Dear Jerusalem Post, do not send these Philistines from the podcast here ever again.
We are actually very close to the Philistine cities, and that whole area was surrounded in historical times by vineyards. And as Lior was telling us, I think when we were not recording, she was saying that throughout this area, they found ancient, what do you call it, where people would make wine, like you'd stand on the wine and stuff?
Presses.
Yes, yeah, all over this area. So there is a historical link to the Philistines.
Shall we say a few thank yous to the nice people who have made this a fabulous podcast for us?
Blackcurrant. I really do taste blackcurrant. This is really good.
You're on the Ribena. You've picked up the wrong bottle. For those people who don't know what Ribena is, it's a blackcurrant drink.
Yes, we should say thank you.
So no, you go first.
You're challenging me because you think I can't remember the names. To Eli Ben Zaken, to Nevo Chazan, and to Lior something, thank you. To all 3 of you, thank you for having made the last couple of days a lot of fun. But not only that, to show that there is tremendous love for the land here, that in both cases of the two wineries, it was never the idea in the first place. One was a semi-trailer driver, and one began because of a whole planning issue with the local authority.
I'd also like to say a big thank you to someone you've not heard on the podcast. Adam Montefiore is the Jerusalem Post's wine correspondent. We spoke to him online during Corona and said, when this is all over, we should go out and do a wine podcast. And we didn't bring him with, but a book that he wrote has given me the inspiration to find some of these wineries in the Judean hills. In fact, he wrote the biography of Domaine Du Castel. So he's played quite a large part in this podcast without actually being here.
And I just want to say a special thank you to Mark's wife, because, as we said when we were coming to Nevo, it's not easy to get to from Judean, and she's very patiently been waiting for us while we recorded this whole podcast. So thank you to you.
Anything else before we say goodbye?
We highly recommend Israeli wines in general. They are very, very competitive. They are highly regarded around the world. We focused on a couple of kosher wineries. Of course, there are many that are not kosher. You can find Israeli wine probably somewhere very close to where you live, and a lot of the wineries you can actually order online, certainly as is the case with the Nevo Winery, where we are completing this podcast.
For those of you listening in Israel, in this time of war, it's important to support Israeli businesses, so try and make an effort to come out to some of the wonderful wineries and visitor centres in Israel. For those of you listening overseas who are planning on coming to Israel, most of the good wineries have good visitor centres. We've brought you 2 wineries. There are hundreds of wineries in Israel.
And if you want more details on the other wineries, you can always reach out to us at MarkDavidPod or drop us an email, markdavidpod@gmail.com. Folks, thanks so much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have. And as we like to say in this part of the world at the end of one of our podcasts,
rate us with a 5-star rating.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.